Okay, but I think we can slowly start. Welcome to the Open Data Toolkit and Assessment Tools session. We have a great panel lined up here. Four of which are here with us today. Two who are connecting remotely, Tim and Meghan. We'll be discussing in these various toolkits and assessment methodologies, and also inviting everyone here to take part in that conversation. We're going to have a presentation by each of the panelists, and they were working on getting a connection to work but
over UNDESA actually.
What's that?
Over UNDESA actually.
Yeah, we're running our own network. So basically, we have a program which consists of two parts. First, we'll have a presentation of the toolkits by Amparo and by Daniel. And secondly, we'll go into the second part where we're looking at this assessment methodology. And you can see the order of the presentations, and then we'll end the session with having discussions. And again, we really invite you to participate, obviously. And we'll also start with having the panelists introduce themselves. So maybe you would like to begin?
Thank you. Welcome to everybody. My name is Albany Ballivian. I work in the statistics department of the World Bank. It's not called statistics department, but it's easier for anybody to understand. It's TECH, which is the acronym for the part of the bank that has been doing development and statistics for many, many years. And we launched our own open data site in 2010. And in the past year, we have moved into helping developing countries which are bank clients with their own open data initiatives. And that's the main, my main work. So should I start?
Yes, maybe let's have David introduce himself.
I can introduce myself.
Okay.
So can you put up my presentation, please?
The second row of buttons and then the last one.
So this is it. It doesn't have to be full screen. Perfect is doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I guess
You can go with Apple 5. Oh, they have the right.
Leave it there.
Try Apple 5, Apple F.
So guys,
That's okay.
can everybody see?
Okay, so please next. So this is the toolkit that we have prepared. It's a web-based toolkit, and the idea was to provide our interlocutors in developing countries, and those are both government officials and non-government officials, with a basic set of information on open data. So this is not the pushing the envelope on the latest on open data. It's rather trying to bring those who don't know about it yet to some basic ideas. And it's divided in 5 different parts, some basic questions, some of the IT solutions, and demand and engagement, data quality and supply and readiness assessment. In this part of the presentation, I will just concentrate on the basic questions. You can all go into the website, it's down there, data.worldbank.org. OGB for open government data. And then in the second part, I will present the readiness assessment. So next. So the basic thing has essentials of open data, starting with a definition, and we define, what's become, I think, a standard way, technically open and legally open, so data that is in an open format, in a machine-readable format, and that has explicit terms of use that enable people to use it in whatever way they want, including for commercial purposes, which is something that developing countries stand being very surprised at. Next, please. Next. So people, thank you. So they ask us, what is this open terms of use? And we give them examples of what is the open terms of use. So we can do also important one, Creative Commons, and several terms of use, including the bank's own website, open data website, which are based on the Creative Commons. And we also have a practical guide for licensing open data. Most of these materials are not produced by us. Perhaps what you will find in the toolkit is 5% produced by the World Bank or less. So we picked the best examples from our toolkit. Next. Then we have some examples of portals, both in countries, in cities, next, and by sectors. In financial management, education, health, next. Nutrition, agriculture, transport, environment, energy, geospatial, ICT, etc. Next. Then we have examples of applications that use open data, and this is something that we want to get more into as we continue developing this website, because when you're trying to sell, when you're trying to evangelize on open data, it is not selling the oil that is going to bring people into the table. It's going to make, what's going to make interesting for people is what the oil is used for. So we want to emphasize more the apps that are built on top of open data. Unfortunately, so far, most of our examples, if not all of them, are from more advanced countries, so we're struggling to find applications from developing countries that people can relate to. Keep going, please. So it's just the list of, you will see there are things on schooling, there are things on policing, there are things on financial management, on ecology, etc. Yes. Then we have a section that is the benefits. So ministers will ask us, what's this? What's in it for me? What's the benefit for my country? So we have collected here most of the studies that we think are relevant and convincing about the benefits of open data along 3 dimensions probably. One is economic growth and employment creation. The second one is public service delivery. And the third one is transparency in better government. Next, please. Then, if we are half successful in trying to convincing people to launch an open data initiative, the next question is how do we do it? And here we have collected some of the policy papers, strategies, and so forth that have been used in other countries as the lead policy for open data. Next. We have other technical assistance tools. I will not read this. I'm also going to pass around a booklet that summarizes this. So we don't do just this. This is one part of our tools, but we also have tailor-made technical assistance tools. Be training, being engagement with users community. We run boot camps for journalists, for innovation, etc., etc. So depending on what's the country interest, we will just engage with them and find out what's the best. Can you please? I think that's it. Is there another slide? Oh, that's it. So what we want is to invite all of you to please give us constructive criticism on this. We're thinking now of turning this into a wiki type thing, so our collaborators can reach it and have it more updated and more comprehensive as we go along. Thank you.
Question.
this presentation, then we'll do a Q&A with the president.
Again, if you click on the right button. No. This one. No? This one. Yeah, that one. That one. Last one in the second row. Okay, anyway. So I'm going to present the guidelines on open government data for citizen engagement. Next. And myself, so thanks for having me. My name is Dietrich. I'm the co-founder and chairman of the German chapter of the Open Knowledge Foundation. I'm also a consultant at a research and consultancy in open government, open data, transparency, and related issues. And I've been invited by UNDESA and UNDESA, which I will explain later on, to help draft this guideline. There is a link that you can notice at the end of on the last slide of the presentation. So PDADM is the Division of Public Administration and Development Management of the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, which is UNDESA. And next. ADM has been conducting research in open government data since 2010. Open government data is relevant to its work as it's an online government service. They do a lot on e-government, so most of you will probably know the e-government index, and they discovered that open government data is actually very relevant to them as it's an initiative to strengthen participatory government. It's a vital part of every open government data or open government policy, as it allows citizens to understand how the government works and thereby to improve accountability and transparency in citizen engagement. So this was very interesting for me to understand that the UN is looking at open government data not from an economic perspective, but from a perspective how this can be helpful to support citizen engagement in governance. And this is what the toolkit or the guidelines are focusing on. Next. So the guidelines are designed, or at least aimed, to inform policymakers and technologists in developing countries, mostly, but also in developed countries, in order to understand what open government data is, why it is important, especially with the focus on increasing citizen engagement, how to assess a country's readiness to start an open government data initiative, and how to then design, implement, and monitor an open government initiative in the country context. It has these 5 sections, so it has an introduction, what open government data is, and then it has a large section on how to evaluate the country's readiness and how to design a strategy, and then it has a section on the actual implementation and monitoring, and it concludes with a section on once it's implemented, how actually to nurture and sustain an open government ecosystem. Because we all know, once open data is published, that's not the end of the story, but this is where the actual works just begins. Next. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, it has an extensive annex with lots of information there. So the elements of the guidelines are basically an introduction of terms and topics, an explanation of the context, methodology of readiness assessment. It has a practical assistance to design a strategy, and then it has step-by-step advice on the actual implementation, or at least aims to. And then it has methodology for evaluation, and as I said, quite an extensive reference and background information. running out of time. So, as we will look later into readiness assessment, these are the let's say, sectors that the readiness assessment of this guideline looks into. I'm not going to read it out. Thanks. And this is what I've learned from drafting this, or these are the questions that I still consider quite open, and there's lots of room for further research. So I was asking myself, like, how can we assess a country's readiness? And I think we are at a very early stage in actually understanding how to do this. How do we gauge impact? How do we what's indicating success and all these measurements? I find we are actually at a very early stage to understand this. And yeah, my conclusion would be to and my recommendations that kind of, or the recommendations of the guidelines that come again and again in the guidelines is that it's important that governments understand that an open government data initiative is not a technical exercise. It's nothing that they can buy. It's nothing that they can just ask their technical department to implement, but it's about a cultural change. That accessing the environment is a tricky part of that, and it's useful to look at the experience from others. So again, the toolkit is not something that we have invented ourselves, but it's also taking bits and pieces from best practice from elsewhere. Getting stakeholders engaged early and often is something that we consider key, and keep it simple, and all the other things are also self-explaining. I have to rush because I'm running out of time. Can you go to the next slide? These are the guidelines where they're published, and there's also a version where you can comment on each of the sections and paragraphs. So please help us improve the guidelines. It's just the beginning of the living document. This is what I would envision for the next steps in this endeavor, is to do more research to better understand readiness, feasibility, demand, impacts, success, and how to evaluate them. And I also think it would make a lot of sense to work together on the assessment and evaluation methodologies, on the tools, and finally all of these exercises to help governments and citizens and other stakeholders to engage in complicated policies. Thank you.
Right, so now we're going to open up the floor. If you have questions for Amparo. Oh, the next slide?
Because there's the link.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Martin Oke, then Austria and Semantic Web Company. I just wonder, you say everyone can reuse it, so what license does these guidelines have?
Okay.
Oh, so CC0 or...
Yeah, unless one, I mean, in our case, most of the things you see are links to others' work. So if they have a different license,
So everyone is free to use and reuse it.
yes.
And the second question, maybe then complete my questions, is maybe I've overseen it, but how do you engage the reuse of data? So I've seen a lot of things, how to publish it and how to open it up, but how do you engage people that they are in these developing countries also learn how to use data, how to reuse data? Is that a part of this issue?
Of course, that's the most important challenge, and like I said before, it's let's say a second stage, the toolkit. So here's the very basics.
Okay.
Once you get into an engagement with a country with an open data initiative, the first thing that we do is a readiness assessment, and we'll tell you about it in the next part of this workshop. And part of the implementation of the action plan is precisely what we're talking about, the reuse. So we do a lot of training. Media boot camps is very important because the media is an amplifier of open data outside their own realm into the general public. but we also do innovation camps. We do training for public sector officials that are the ones that collect the data. We do hackathons. We do a lot of this types of things.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there's another question.
Two quick questions for both of you. So the first one, with a 10-minute presentation, I didn't catch what is the major difference between the two approaches and why then there have been two organizations that are international organizations doing what sounds similar, it might be different. And the second quick question is, do you see, because you Amparo mentioned it briefly, but do you see a major difference in the way you should approach readiness assessments from developed countries and developing countries?
I prefer to leave the readiness assessment question to the second part, if you don't mind. But on the first part, I completely agree. There is absolutely no need to have two. It's just happened that we did something very quick and dirty around July of last year in the occasion of the second International Open Government Conference in Washington. And they'll just put together a collection of materials. This is not a print document, unlike the UNDESA. There is a print document, but now they've hanged it into a public discussion site, which is great. And so I think that they started afterwards, but we agreed, we had a conversation, and we agreed that in the content, we shouldn't be contradicting each other. We should try to have the same message, and eventually they probably will converge, which will be the best, right? But with a document that is a living document, the challenge is different than when you have a document that is self-contained and you have references from one section to the other, because the living document obviously has contributions from all parts, right? So there's that slight difference, but other than that, it's just the timing. We didn't know that the other was doing this, and we learned that the other was doing this when we were already started, and so we try to do the best we can.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think they should be merged in the future. I mean, when we started working on the Open Government Data for Citizen Engagement Guidelines, they were actually called Toolkit as well. But then over the drafting period, it turned out to become more and more policy guidelines, which I think there's also a demand for that. But I would think on the practical aspects, toolkits, the reference sections, and especially also on the assessment and impact analysis, we should work together and cooperate with as many organizations as possible.
Do the guidelines address the scenario of like changing governments or public administration? Because that's been kind of like a interesting factor whenever that's the opening data process started.
No, ours don't, and if you have any reference to any work from other people, because like I said, we basically collect things that others have done, so if you have a reference, we'll be very happy to put it there. It is an issue, in my experience working in development issues, which is quite a bunch of years, it matters how mature is the program for it to be vulnerable or not to a changing government, right? So the challenge would be in that situation to bring it to a point of no return, which is not easier said than done, but still I think the guiding is wrong.
Because thinking about loud regarding guidelines, it would be useful to have some certain guidelines for those governments that are about to leave office, so they can actually do something about it.
In the UNDESA guidelines, we kind of touch on the topic when we come to the problem of establishing a long-term vision, but at the same time keeping things simple. So having small steps, but yes, having a long-term vision, which is not always simple to understand.
Anne Jelima from the World Wide Web Foundation. It's a question mainly for you, Amparo, because of your background as a statistician, but Dan, you might want to comment as well. I'm curious to know to what extent are capacity building efforts already engaging, and to what extent do they need to engage the ongoing efforts to improve the quality of statistics in developing countries?
That's a great question. Thank you very much for making it. I don't have a background as a statistician, but I am prepared to answer that. What we have found in developing countries is that the largest producers of data, unlike the developed world, are the national statistical offices. And yet, the national statistical offices are seldom involved in the open data initiatives in the country. We don't think that they are equipped to lead those initiatives, so that's not why we're there. But we're trying to understand better why are not they involved in open data initiatives. And we have just started this work. We have formed a working group with people from other agencies like the World Bank, plus a few statistical offices from developed countries that have already opened some of their data, plus a statistical office in developing countries, and we have an external consultant, a worldwide expert, to try to address some of the issues. So we put in a document all the issues that we hear about, and they are concerned about data privacy, they are concerned about data quality, they are concerned about loss of revenue, they're concerned about, so we want to understand better those concerns. Even there may be technological challenges, because the platforms for open data may not be well suited to the type of data that statistical offices produce, which is in many cases census and survey data that it has different characteristics than the time series that are normally collected in open data portals. So we need to understand those better. We're just starting that work.
I have a question. Sorry.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question how the World Bank is communicating this to the member states, because I always seem to encounter government officials who never heard about this. For instance, just an example is the ASEAN countries. It's a bunch of Asian countries, and they somehow are still in the world of e-government. So, what is the communication process for the World Bank?
It's not easy. Like I said, we started work with developing countries only a year ago, and we are planning to do regional workshops. We already did one in Latin America in June of this year for Latin American countries, and we have 3 more planned, one for Asian countries, one for African countries, and one for Eastern European countries. They will happen between now and the end of 2014. So sometimes the countries themselves come to us. We try to use every possible opportunity within our resource constraints like this conference and others to communicate to others, and hope that you will help us do that as well. But we are not there yet. Yeah, I acknowledge that it's not easy. But please take as many of these as you can, distribute them in the Asian countries, and have them call us.
Yes, so Pierre Chansky from the Organization Relation France. What would you say to developing countries who respond, okay, open data seems great, but we have first to develop our ICT infrastructure, so it's not actually our priority.
I would recommend to just implement open data and transparency in mind when developing the ICT infrastructure. Something that I refer very often to when it comes to the feasibility of implementing an open government data initiative in a developing country. I refer back to Becky Hock, which did the open data study for Transparency and Accountability Initiative, and she interviewed a lot of people around the world, and when she interviewed Tim Berners-Lee, he answered, it has to start at the top, from the middle and from the bottom. So you need political commitment from the highest level, you need a well-educated and skilled and equipped civil servant layer in the middle that can actually implement the stuff, and you need the bottom up, you need the civil society organizations, you need the demand side, you need actually civic hackers that, even if they're only a small group, but they can help facilitate.
Yeah, we should probably wrap up this first part if you actually stick to the program. So we can, in the final discussion, we can go back into some of these questions. So for this second part, we're going to have a presentation of the assessment methodologies, and you're going to begin again.
Yeah.
I should say, we're really struggling to make the connection work with the two presentations remotely. It seems that whenever we're all in the same room with all our devices, then it's choking a little bit. I hope it will work. After Amparo, we'll have 10 and Meghan to say, so please bear with us for
Okay, so this is work again that we started in the summer of 2012, and when we put ourselves in the situation of trying to help a new country with open data, and so where do we start? How do we know what to tell them? And we decided to do this readiness assessment. As you will see from the content, maybe the title is not the most fortunate, and we will be also happy to receive comments and suggestions for the title. Can you please go ahead? So what is, suppose a country or a subnational government or a city government or even a special sector ministry asks you to provide technical assistance. How do you identify the data? How do you assess the quality of the data? Are there any legal obstacles to adopt an open license in this country? How do you motivate the demand and the system developers in this country that can build apps, visuals, etc.? What type of IT systems are available, etc.? So the ODRA is a methodology that is proven. It's not completely proven, but at least it's been implemented in some research countries. So the tool is designed basically to build a plan of actions on open data that is custom tailored to a country, a subnational country, a city, or a sector. It is a set of questions on 8 subjects that we consider necessary for open data initiative. And those 8 subjects are the legal framework, the institutional framework, the supply of data in the country, the demand of data, the IT infrastructure, the financials for an open data initiative, the ecosystem, and 8 one that I forget right now. The output of the readiness assessment is not a study, it's not an impact evaluation. The main output is an action plan for the country that says these are the things that you need to do in your country to have an open data initiative. It is not a rating exercise. We don't intend to benchmark it because anybody or to measure or rank countries in any way. On the contrary, all we want to do with the readiness assessment is to be able to tell the countries what are the things that we think they should do. If there are obstacles in their legal system, if there's some article in some law that doesn't allow them to adopt an open license, we'll tell them that. If their IT systems are not conducive to an open, we call it an open data portal, etc., we'll tell them that. Each place is different. Right? It is conducted by a joint team, always of World Bank and the client, the government of our client. We have 2 or 3 international experts. Sometimes it's bank staff, sometimes it's international consultants who are experts in open data, and we always require at least 4 people from the local team. 1, a leader, and we try that this leader is somebody who has a cross-cutting mandate, whatever his position or her position is, because it's very difficult for somebody who works in the National Statistical Office or the IT Ministry or whatever to have sufficient political leverage with the owners of the data in the health sector and the education sector. So we try to have a leader that comes from the planning or the ministry of the Prime Minister's office or the President's office or something. And then we want to have a local lawyer who will guide us through the legal landscape, an IT expert, and a statistician who knows about the data supply in the country. It's a very short pragmatic exercise. It lasts about 3 weeks. It's inexpensive. It's on the order of $50,000 depending on the country and the travel costs of the country. And the main outcome is this list of actions. And it can be done at the national, subnational, or city or sector level. You will find it in the toolkit, like I said before. We have both the Word version, the PDF, and a crowd Commons version, and it's unofficially translated into French, Spanish, and Russian. We have implemented it so far in 5 countries. In Russia, in the state of Ulyanovsk, that's a subnational engagement. Rwanda, Tanzania, Peru, and Antigua and Barbuda. We only publish the reports and the action plans with the government permission, and so far we have those for Ulyanovsk and Antigua. The other 3 are that's a no, but have nothing yet. And there are 3 more in the planning stages within the next 2 months. Mexico, Indonesia, and in Moldova we're going to do our first ODRA at the sector level with the private sector. That is it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, so according to our schedule, we wanted to connect now in Davies in Washington. It's not going so well, so I was actually hoping if we could ask everyone to jump off the Wi-Fi. I know this is not really optimal, but in order for this to work, hopefully it works. We started out having a phone connection to ensure that we had our own networks, but that actually turned out. So now we're back on the Wi-Fi. But yeah, if you could please do that, then there should be a chance. I was actually wondering, Maria, would you be willing to do your presentation now? And then hopefully the network will be ready for attending.
Please close your devices, go offline. All of them. Go offline, love.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ubaldi, and I'm here representing the OECD. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the OECD, but it's an international organization based in Paris. Our member countries are 34, and most of them are advanced economies. At the OECD, I'm responsible for the area of work on government that we see as part of the work on ICT to support public sector reform and modernization. And this area of work belongs to the directorate responsible for public governance related issues. And I'm here today because as part of our program of work and the area of work that I lead, open government data is becoming a key topic and has been transformed in a priority project that we've been implementing for the past 7 years. So how did we start working on open government data? Because our member countries asked us to work on it with a specific focus on impact assessment. In most of our governments of our member countries, open government data has already been translated into an initiative, into a portal, into a what they call a strategy. And as they are at the stage of implementation in which they would like to see some benefit being realized, they ask for our help to understand, first of all, what are the key elements when it comes to the so-called enabling environment of any open government data initiative, and therefore issues that concern the organizational matters, the policy-related matters, the legal matters, the technical matters, and so on. But they also asked us to help them understand if the value is actually being achieved, and most of all understand what kind of assessment tool they need to utilize to be able to understand if the specific value they want to achieve is being created. I'm saying this because we've seen that across our member countries there are 3 main different types of value creation they try to target. The so-called economic value, both in the wider economy and within the public sector. Therefore, we're talking about higher cost efficiency, for instance, in delivering services, bringing down the cost of sharing information, and so on. The second aspect is what we call, and the service delivery component. So it's not only diminishing the cost of the back-end organization to deliver services and interact with the public, but also bringing down the cost of delivering services, maybe engaging with outside stakeholders. There's a second set of value aspects which concern the social value creation, and they have to see with increasing the engagement with citizens, but not only, with civil society organizations and with the private sector. And it has to see also with the so-called idea of empowering citizens to make better decisions and also reducing the digital disconnection of parts of the population. And then there's a third set of values which are related to the public governance and good governance domain, and therefore they include the increased transparency, increased integrity, and increased accountability. So, and our position is not to advocate for any of these values, but to help countries understand if the enormous resources they're investing on open government data initiatives and supporting policies are actually helping them to achieve what they want to achieve. Because this is a domain area that I'm very enthusiastic brings multi-stakeholders on board, and therefore it's not enough that a portal is created, and it's not enough that an initiative is being launched, but more and more you guys are, as citizens, are asking governments, okay, what are you achieving with these efforts that you're putting in place? So I'm not going into details here, but this shows you why we started working on it, because our government members asked us to work on it. We produced a working paper that I'm going to circulate here for any who wants a copy, and it's available also online. At the end you'll see the link. The idea was to have a working paper divided into two parts. The first part that highlights the key issues, which cover all the overarching issues that have been mentioned here before. And then there's a second part which includes a methodology to assess impact. The methodology has two parts: an analytical framework, which gathers a number of questions similarly to the methodologies we use to conduct country reviews on the various policy areas. And those are key questions that we ask countries to answer concerning the overarching issues in the various domains I mentioned earlier, like policies, legal, organization, and so on. And then there's a second part of the methodology, which so far suggests the collection of a comprehensive set of data corresponding to the various areas, which have the objective of eventually developing metrics and indicators that help countries understand if the impact has actually been achieved. And on the basis of this methodology, we ran a first-time open government data survey across all 34 member countries of the OECD, plus Brazil, the United States, Russia, and Ukraine, and Egypt wanted to complete the survey. The objective of the survey was to map the situation in all the overarching areas I mentioned and that you can see in the methodology in OECD member countries. So the objective was not to rank. This work does not have the ultimate goal of benchmarking countries, ranking countries, but to understand what's going on. For instance, I don't know, is there a portal? Is it a repository of other portals? Is it a unique point of access to government data? In terms of efforts that have been made to develop skills within the public sector, what has been done. In terms of user engagement, for instance, what is the effort and what kind of efforts are the countries doing? In terms of value creation, what are the tools governments are using? So the idea was really to take a picture, because we realized that many were talking about open government data, but few people, at least in the OECD context, had a comprehensive idea of what governments were doing. And what we realized is that there are countries that have been bolder, UK, the US, slowly France caught up, but there are many other countries that have done a lot, but simply because their geographic location is not so centric, or because their marketing efforts are not so strong, citizens were not, and I mean the wider community was not even aware of how much had been done and achieved in those countries. We are now in the phase of, okay, the results of these will be published towards the end of the year, so my suggestion is to keep an eye on our website. And we are now pilot testing the methodology in 8 OECD member countries plus 2 countries in the MENA region to actually be able to validate it and then to use it to assist individual countries, as I said, in assessing the impact, in understanding if the core elements are in place to be able to have initiatives that enable to achieve the impact, and then to assess the impact creation and the value creation. Next, please. So the methodology has 2 parts. This is like that I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to go back in that. The scope is assess value and impact in the 3 main areas that I said: economic, social, and good governance. The objective is to understand structure, is actually to help our governments to understand, structure, and manage open government data impact, and to develop what we call strategies for government data and information management, because we realize that behind many of these open government data initiatives, there isn't a strategy that looks at how government data and information should be managed in an effective and an efficient way. And it all starts from there. And that starts from within the public sector understanding who produces and collects, who shares data, if data is being shared or not, if not, why, and so on. And the result that we hope to achieve is to help countries develop more effective open data policies and more sustainable open government data reuse. And it's the discussion that Daniel also touched upon earlier about the ecosystem. We realize that many governments have no idea of what it implies, the creation of an ecosystem of a number of stakeholders that actually then have to use the data and reuse the data to produce the value. So as I said, in terms of measurement, so far we have run a survey. We are pilot testing the methodology in the country. And in pilot testing the methodology, we aim to validate the methodology that then can be used in other countries. So we did not want this to be a more typical OECD exercise that started in our offices and then launches a methodology that we think is valid, but then doesn't help to assess the impact. So we wanted to have it as an open process. That's why we are pilot testing it in 8 countries, to be able to say, yes, we worked with your colleagues whenever we go to a government to see if this was actually helping to produce value. And some of the areas that we realize are of great importance for a number of delegations of our countries that came to see us in the past 12 months are focusing on examples of data mining, data analytics, crowdsourcing, meaning they are asking us to use the methodology to bring out concrete examples that they can replicate of experiences that produce the value. So for instance, there are a number of experiences at the local level of government where data analytics has helped to improve service delivery, engaging outside stakeholders from the government, diminishing the cost, delivering better quality services. These examples are not perceived as being as many from the central level of government because implementing them is more difficult. So the request we are hearing is help us also translating experiences to the central level of government.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm done. This is just this slide and the next one. You can also skip them. But I wanted to highlight that the relevance of the survey we conducted in our countries, for instance, was to. This is more, but I'll tell you is that we hear so much that one of the goals when governments want to sell open government initiatives is to engage citizens and outside stakeholders. And then when we ask them what are the top priorities that worry you when putting together an open government initiative, engaging citizens is not among the 3 top priorities. This means that we need to work with our governments to make them understand what does it mean, translating open government initiatives, and then they improve results. And then the next slide actually looks at the challenges. And most of the challenges governments see are not technical, they are not even policy, but they are institutional and organizational and funding. Because it has to see a lot with the existing funding models associated with the production and sharing of information, which is not a minor element, meaning open government data brings a cost. And we need to understand what the cost is to have governments compensate for the cost with higher than it. The last slide is just to give you my information. As I said, this is an open process, so we welcome all the comments any of you may have on the methodology in terms of issue we may have missed, but in terms of relevance of data that in your view can be collected to actually show if the results have been achieved. Thank you.
Okay, so it seems the network is much better now, so we're going to try with one-person connections. And
if everybody else could go offline.
Yeah, before then please turn off your Wi-Fi connection just for a few minutes while we continue the transition. So, Tim, are you there? Tim or Meghan, can you hear us?
It's Meghan, I can hear you.
Great. So Tim is actually scheduled to go first. Can you hear us, Tim? Yeah. Meghan, would you be up for doing the next presentation?
Sure.
Great. So let me just take
Are my slides up?
1 second. And I should mention that we wanted Meghan and Tim to hear the entire conversation, but it's really difficult with the microphone and the connection and everything. So bear with them if they are talking or referring to things that we already discussed. So Meghan, we have your slides on the screen now.
Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and I'm so happy to be talking to you from a very chilly New York State here in the U.S. My presentation is going to be short. I was able to hear a lot of what Barbara talked about and Amparo, so I'm happy to be adding to the knowledge base at this conference the work that we've done in open data. So if we could just go on to the next slide. I want to, for anyone in the room who doesn't know who CTG is, we are the Center for Technology and Government at the University at Albany. We focus in the area of digital government and have been working in the space of opening data, information access for the past 15 to 20 years, when they weren't calling it open data. Next slide. A lot of the work that we do, we call before the beginning. So when we talk about tools and approaches, we're doing planning and assessment with organizations on what data sets they should open up, what types of value they should bring, and do they have the capabilities within the organization to open the data and share it. And so when I talk about tools, it's not technology tools, it is more planning tools and assessment tools. The three that I have listed here, our Government Information Sharing Toolkit, is focused on assessing capabilities and from that information developing plans to open and share data. The one to the right, which says maximize and balance public value, that's our public value assessment tool, which has been used in the area of not only open government, but recently in understanding the public value of data sets, so an organization can achieve the right balance when they choose which data sets they're putting forth. And the last one, understanding the interaction among stakeholders. These are more case studies about how the interactions changed and the processes and the workflows when data was opened, using two case studies, one from the United States and one from Canada. If you go to the next slide, you'll see two other tools that I'm not going to talk about today, but I just wanted to mention. One is called Opening Gateways. This is updated from many years ago when we were helping organizations develop records management programs, which were really information access programs that have a component of opening data, but it's more up the stream into the organization, making decisions early on about how to structure programs so that in the end you can share and open data. And finally, the last one is the UN meter tool that we developed. And it's for e-government, but if you take a look at it, it's still, a lot of parts are very relevant for assessing readiness to open data, and it's worth a look. If we move to the next slide, I'm going to quickly go through some of the areas that we focus on. If you look at assessing capabilities, I pulled some of the dimensions and some of the information from our toolkit. And those dimensions there, I hope the screen is big enough that you can see it. If not, I put all the links at the end of this, slideshow. The areas that we assess are everything from the business model and architecture to infrastructure to knowledge and acceptance of technology. So looking at an organization's capability to understand what data sets they have, what platforms they have, what they're looking to do. And we use a couple of methods. One is both a questionnaire. You'll see at the bottom there's some question. It's an example on collaboration readiness that asks people to answer individually these questions, and then also as a group process to get together and talk about, on a continuum of high capability and low capabilities, where they see their organization sitting. So it takes two types of information and melts them together. We always see this type of assessment readiness as both individual work and group process work. And so I think when you get into that toolkit, you'll be able to see how we use both processes, and it gives a description for organizations to do this on their own. If we go to the next slide, the Center for Technology and Government, as part of the Open Government Alliance, did work with the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And through this work, we did a quick readiness assessment in moving into open government with special focus on opening data. And we used the World Bank Open Data Maturity Model as a guide, as their open data readiness assessment tool was not ready for prime time at the time of this work. So what we did was we morphed the assessment capability toolkit from CTG and the World Bank Maturity Model together in a set of individual and group exercises. If we go to the next slide, what you'll see here is just an example of some of the things that we did. We pulled people together and talked about areas of security and standards as it relates to open government, and then specifically open data. We used a process by which people were able to get out their implicit assumptions and their thinking on each of these continuums. We also had them answer questions in the individual worksheets and then gather groups together to discuss each of the different attributes and where their readiness stood. And two things emerged from there. One, people gained more of an understanding about each of the dimensions, and also they were able to ask each other questions based on where people thought they were on the continuum, because inevitably people in the room, some people think that they're high capability and some people think they're low, and the best information comes when they're able to discuss it with each other and come to an understanding of where they think their organization is. I'm going to quickly move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about public value planning. In this area, CTG works with organizations to help them understand if they have the right balance of public value with their open data portfolio. And so some of the questions you see there are the questions we help people answer. What are the mix of stakeholders we're serving? What is the value that's most prominent? What do we want our open data portfolio to look like? So in the beginning I said CTG's tools are the open data are to help people think about their open data portfolio. And if we could go on to the next slide, this work is rooted in a public value framework that was developed back in 2005 and vetted through a global community. And the public value framework looks at value from other perspectives, such as social value, quality of life, stewardship, which is trust in government, and really expands the definition of value. So while this work was very important and back in 2005, it sat mostly in theoretical, in scholarly articles. And what CTG did with a little bit of money from the National Science Foundation was make it more operational, to look at it and say, how do public managers do planning in the area of public value? If we move on to the next slide, you'll see that what we did was we took it from very theoretical into more of a tool. Let's move on to the next slide, which talks more about the public value types.
Yeah, Meghan, we're running a little short on time. Maybe.
Okay, I have.
have.
Yep, only a couple more slides. So as you see these different types of value, what we do is we take each data set and we gather different groups of people from an agency or an organization, and they talk about what the who the different stakeholders will be, what the different types of value will be for each of the data sets, and then come together and see if they can develop an overall balance or portfolio for their organization. If we move on to the next slide, you'll see we did this with the U.S. Department of Transportation as they were updating their Open Government Plan back in 2012. And the two links I put in there are the links to the U.S. DOT plan and the webinar where we talked about it with the U.S. DOT about how they used it for their entire planning process. And then finally, we were approached by the New York State Office of the State Controller, and the picture you see there is of Teresa Pardo, the director of the Center for Technology and Government, which I know many of you know. And we led them through a series of workshops, and they're currently developing their open data portfolio based on a public value assessment. So I'm sorry that I ran over. I did put the last slide in, which shows the links to everything that I'm talking about, and I hope that I can hear you enough to answer questions when that time comes. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on. Tim, are you still with us?
Hello, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Let me just find your slides here. You're in Washington, correct?
So I'm currently in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I'm sorry not to be there with you in Geneva. I'd really like to be joining you, but couldn't be there. Are you ready with the slides?
1 second.
So maybe I'll just start and then they can come up as we go. So I wanted to just briefly share some of the current thinking going on at the Web Foundation around open data assessment methods. And when the second slide comes up, you'll see a framework where we've been thinking about different ways in which assessment methods work and different things they target. And as we did a review of what was out there, we recognised there were 3 broad sorts of assessment going on. One are the readiness assessments and feasibility studies that I believe Amparo spoke a bit about, and that are in some of the toolkits. Then there are implementation assessments looking at are governments or sectors or different groups publishing open data, what quality is it available in ways that are usable. And then the trickiest but perhaps most important area of impact assessments or understanding how being ready for and implementing open data leads to the kind of social change we want to see. On the third slide, just highlighting that the focus of what I'll speak about briefly here is around some of the readiness assessment work that the Web Foundation has done. And if we go to the fourth slide, that gives a brief overview of the 3 studies the Foundation has worked on over the last couple of years. Back in 2011, 2 open data feasibility studies were published on Chile and Ghana, some of the first studies that try to look comprehensively at are the foundations in place in a country in order to build an open data initiative, and if so, what does that initiative need to look like? Where are the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities? And these studies have taken place through a multi-stage process of data collection and analysis. For reasons I'll speak on this slide presented in a linear form, but obviously as all linear diagrams are, it represents a much more overlapping process that involves desk research to understand the context of each country, recognising that every country is different and assessment isn't a sort of cookie-cutter piece of work that can just be taken from one place to another. It needs a deep understanding of the context of the country. The process involves in-country interviews. More recent assessments have used some online surveys for data collection, group meetings with partners. Really important phase of validating claims that are made around open data, because people have many different understandings of what's being spoken about when talking about open data, particularly in contexts where there aren't already initiatives. So digging below the surface of people's initial responses to questions to triangulate, check that the different people are agreeing is really important. Then feed into the final report writing. I believe Stefan Bavera is in the room there and might be able to say more later on in discussions about some of that process for some of the earlier studies, as I believe he was involved in some of these. And the framework that's used in here, if we can go to the 5th slide, is a 6-dimensional framework looking at 6 different open data: the political, organisational, legal, technical, social, and economic dimensions. Recognising not only do we need to understand readiness in each of these contexts, so the country needs to be politically have some degree of readiness, some degree of organisational readiness, Understanding we also want to see open data implemented across these settings and having impacts across these settings. And one of the other key insights from going through the process of doing these assessments has been that it's not only a case of measuring these in isolation, it's about understanding where are the connections between, say, the political and organisational agendas for open data, or are legal and technical incentives for key actors aligned. So seeing these as part of a network that need to be well connected. With a few seconds left to go, I'll go to the sixth slide just to very briefly say, having done those readiness assessments in the past, what are we looking at now in the foundation? Measuring and assessing and understanding open data. And we're trying to link up these three to understand implementation and to understand the emerging impacts of open data, to better inform the design of readiness assessments, to better inform support toolkit structures for implementation. And we're doing that at a macro level, a micro level, and a sectoral level. At the macro level, the study will be launching later this year called the Open Data Barometer, that looks across a range of dimensions, across those 6 dimensions of open data, and tries to take a top-down overview picture of what's happening in 70 or more countries across the world with open data, to give us a sense of different patterns of engagement with open data across the world. So look out for that, and there are a number of people at OKCon being involved in that and can tell you more. We've run a program of research with the Canadian Institute of test called Exploring the Emerging Impacts of Open Data in Developing Countries, which is working through 7 studies of how data is being used for us to then say it'd be better implemented. And lastly, we take approach to try and look at how an open data implementation and impact be secured in sectors such as agriculture, land, and so on, rather than just at the country level. And I'll end there.
Yeah, thank you very much. We heard you loud and clear all the way through, except for the things you said about ONDC. Would you maybe want to say that again, please?
Sure, yes. The Open Data in Developing Countries project is a 2.5-year research program funded by Canada's International Development Research Centre, and where we're working with a range of 17 case study partners across the Global South who are seeking to understand how open data is used in practice. And in the process of doing that, they're also looking at the context of open data in their countries or sectors and how it's been implemented, so that by understanding the dynamics of open data in creating change, we can better understand what we should be looking for in readiness and implementation assessment tools. So we're trying to join the dots between these different parts of open data assessment. And I'd be really keen to hear what discussions come out of today around that.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. So we're going to keep the line open to Meghan and Tim, so hopefully they'll be able to hear the discussions. We have one presentation left for before, but after that we're going to go to opening the floor once again and questions. If there's a question directly aimed at Meghan or Tim, and they can't hear what you're saying, then I suggest that you come up here and then talk closer to the microphone, so then they'll be able to reply with that. Okay? But last up is Sol.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tom. I'm a self-employed change management consultant, and I've been working with government bodies to open up their data in the past 5 years. And I'm also currently the lead editor for the Open Knowledge Foundation's Open Data Census project, which I'm going to be briefly talking about today. You see a screenshot of the census on the slide, and what the census does, it tries to track for countries around the world on 10 key data sets, how open or not open these 10 key data sets are in that country. If you go to the next slide. And we do that by asking people in those countries to look at how open or not open those data sets are. So it's not a sort of a desk research exercise, but we try to rely on local expertise and invite people in to become country editors, preferably more than one per country, because not any single individual will have a complete overview, and bring that data together on the website. There's already a lot of information in the census, and in the past months we have been trying to improve the quality of that, because sometimes you bump into differences in perception. I live in the Netherlands. The government published, or at least they said they did, a cadastral data set, but for me as a reuser perspective, it was simply nowhere to be found. So the government had sort of said, well, we've done that, but there was no real way of actually getting to the data yet. So this census shows differences in perceptions of reality. It's not just sort of the reality of, in this case, the data holder, but also how is it perceived by reusers. And that's, I think, an interesting difference to other assessment tools. We've been pushing in the past months to extend the coverage, also because at the end of October there's an OGP meetup in London. So we're trying to get as many OGP countries covered by the census as we can. We're also still taking on board country editors to help us do that. We're targeting 71 countries right now, and we have people involved looking at the data for 49 of those. So if you're willing to help out, that would be great. Can you go to the next slide? The reason that we're doing that push is because this is people-generated data. We need to sort of somehow start ensuring that the quality of what we collect is actually is good enough. Because only then will it be sort of a real tool for conversation, not just between reusers, but also in the conversation with their government and between governments themselves. Next slide, please, for a quick look at what it looks like. Like I said, we're tracking 10 different data sets, and the 10 that we're tracking are the ones when we started asking around which ones are most key to you in your country at this moment. So what you end up with, because a lot of countries are still in the process of opening up their data on a grander scale, is you end up with 10 data sets that are more about the infrastructure enabling widespread reuse of data than specific data sets connected to specific societal issues. So you will find things in here like spending data, election results, transport data, sort of the core data sets without which you sort of lack context to do things with other data sets that might actually be more relevant. So these are just a list of 10 data sets that more or less merged by accident of asking around, and that leads to a question, are these the right data sets to track? And that's why yesterday, next slide please, we did a workshop here at the conference to start asking those questions to make sure that the census can be a tool for data reusers across the world, and we asked how could we turn this tool into a better tool. And we also asked, are these the right data sets to cover, and what type of functionality would actually improve the tool to help us do that. And these are some of the results there. In the discussion it emerged that making this distinction between the on-paper reality of what we and what governments say that we've found and the actual perceived reality when you try to do something with that, that should be a distinction that probably needs to be more visible in the census somehow. We're not quite sure on how to do that, but it probably takes showing the sources of the information more and where is it coming from, so that you can actually see where sort of the fact-checking has been done or not. We also looked at extending the data sets covered, and part of that might be done through looking at what are actually societal issues that also OGP plans, for instance, are trying to address. And are the key related data sets for that, are they actually being released or not? And are they released in an open enough way? And to provide the census as a more conversational tool inside countries, we discussed maybe putting up national pages that bring more context together, not just a comparison with other countries, but also referencing local discussions, referencing existing action plans, and maybe also including government responses to that. So that's sort of the path forward that we're looking at. We have no clue about the answers yet, so any input that you want to provide is welcome, because we try to bring that sort of reusing perspective into this as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. And we have half an hour left, so we'll open up the floor now for questions. Okay, so I think
my first question would more be a comment to what Tom just said. I think it's important to stress out that even if on one data set, let's say the budget data of a country, all these things were green, it wouldn't mean that not more could be done. For example, even if they were all green, we could still ask the question of what value does it create? Is it useful to the people on the ground that want to work with it? And then we could ask questions like, maybe should it be more granular, or should it be more timely, or more, what other information do we need to put more context? So,
my question is directed to Barbara Ubaldi. Nice to see you. I'm from Russia, and just a suggestion, maybe not when you make pilot projects in your when you make pilot assessment, maybe you include not only OECD countries. Maybe look at us as well. We are interested in participation.
I have a question, really looking at the toolkits and the assessments. To what extent are all of you working based on demand from the government to do some of these assessments? So I think there's an important difference there on doing the assessments coming in from the outside, government financed, and actually having that assessment being asked for by government. That probably influences buy-in. So I'd be curious to know how that differs from toolkit to toolkit.
We only do in countries who ask us.
Yes, I know. Sorry, I'm with the wrong bank. In Indonesia.
Yeah, but the others don't. I'll take the opportunity.
For UNDESA, it's very clear it's a self-assessment toolkit. So it's just a methodology that enables governments to understand and assess themselves.
In the case of the OECD, it's only if governments ask for it.
And in the case of the Open Data Census, no government has been asking for it. But they're looking at it, yeah.
And I think the other two that are remotely, for what I know, the Web Foundation does only in countries that they've asked or they have financing or both, and the same is also true for the University of Albany.
Could you hear that, Tim? Meghan?
I could not hear any of that.
Can I comment on the Web Foundation's work in Indonesia?
Okay, yeah, okay, so, we have Andrew.
Yeah, okay. So that one was not requested by the government, although we involved different parts of the government.
Sorry, which one?
Possible. The Indonesia assessment. So I think when we talk about country ownership, particularly in the realm of government data, it's important not to confuse the government with the country. So our perspective is that although government is a very important stakeholder, so is civil society, so is the private sector. Any of those groups have the right and the responsibility to demand open data, and we would work with any of those groups to initiate a readiness assessment. So for us, a request coming from the government is not a precondition to starting readiness assessment.
I think that's an important thing, and we understand that difference, but in our case, the readiness assessment tool was developed with governments in mind.
Yeah, and that makes sense because the World
Bank.
Bank.
Nothing wrong of doing it from another point of view, but
yeah,
they are our clients, right?
Exactly.
And so they are,
Exactly.
and they are the producers of most of the data.
Yeah.
So that's our point.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for the World Bank because the World Bank does have governments as its clients. For a civil society organization like the Web Foundation, of course we try to work closely with governments, but we have other constituencies as well.
Yeah, we work closely with the Web Foundation.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I can just add to this. Yeah, my belief would be similar to the one of Amparo, meaning governments are our clients, but we, in developing this methodology, we wanted to make it open and ask for comments from all of you to see if it's relevant or not. exactly because we wanted to create a tool, yes, for governments, for our clients, but that embeds the point of view of all the other stakeholders. And that's why we, instead of having a methodology just developed with governments, we wanted to take the first step, prepare it to work with governments, but then opening up to the comments of all the other stakeholders to make sure that the points of view are embedded.
Do you have a short comment?
Just a very short question on that, because I think it's interesting that we're now seeing two assessments on the same country. So is anybody looking into comparing those and asking questions on
Which country?
Indonesia?
No, we haven't done it yet.
But you will do it.
Yeah, we will do it. So the question will be relevant after we do it.
Right.
Well, because we haven't done it yet, so we won't know whether we have any differences or not until we do
No, but
it.
I think it would be very interesting too.
Of course, yeah, but not today. We're not ready to answer the question today. May I add one more thing? I mean, even if you do one of these things from the point of view of the government, because that's the object of your technical assistance, you need to involve the user side, because the measure of the success is going to be given by the users. So it's not just in contributing to it, but in asking them what data they want and helping it. And in the implementation of the action plan, a lot of the implementation has to do, I would say 50-50 with technical assistance to the government and technical assistance to the user side, which is mostly non-government.
Thank you. And then it's here in the corner, and it's here, and then it's, yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, right, yeah.
Hi, my name is Karolis. I work for Transparency International in Lithuania. I've got a question about the World Bank assessment toolkits. I understand this would be very useful in our context, but I don't see any of our government officials standing up and going to the World Bank and kicking off the conversation about this. And the question is there any role for civil society organizations like TI, for instance, to step up, to encourage governments to maybe approach the World Bank? Where do we find ourselves in this conversation? Are we, complete outsiders? Do we have a role? How do you see this?
I think that in the situation that you are describing, you do have the very important role of the first step, okay? And we can help you to convince the government, right? At the end of the day, I mean, there are two possible scenarios. One is that the government doesn't even know about it or doesn't care about it, and you advocate and you raise their awareness, you tell them about it, you tell them what's the benefit for them, and maybe they will become interested. The other scenario is they just don't want to do it. If they don't want to do it, if they are completely opposed to it, they will try to turn their arm, don't want to do it, that's okay. You're a sovereign country. There are still things that you can do from the civil society perspective. You can use data that has been open about your country by other institutions such as the World Bank. Because we have a country page with open data for Lithuania and every other country. So there are a lot of things, and there are other institutions like the bank that have open data in Lithuania. There's things that you can do, but truth be told, it's limited if the largest producer of data in your country doesn't want to release it in open formats. There's just so much that you can do, so keep insisting, be patient, wait, be diplomatic, use us to convince them.
Hi, my name is Oleg Petrov. I work with Amparo at the World Bank on open data. So I would like to clarify that this assessment methodology, which you referred to, is a global public good. We created not as a commercial product which we want to sell. No, we created that as a public good you can use for your own purposes. Okay, so it would be good if you recognize that when you use it that it was developed by the World Bank, but it's completely free and unlimited use for by different organizations. So if you would like to go ahead, use that assessment tool and do your own assessment using local resources, that's perfectly fine. You don't need World Bank for that, right? It's very important to understand that you don't need to be involved in all cases. So in some cases, we may add value. So whether we bring financing or we bring expertise, so we're happy to support if you feel that we can add value, right? In the case of Lithuania, we can discuss specifically, if we can add value or not. But you can go to the website, which Amparo, put, and it's in the brochure. You can download the tool and start assessing tomorrow on your own. Okay, so you don't need us for that. very important. But those of you who are interested to collaborate with us, we'll be very happy to discuss how in your particular country a sectoral assessment or a national assessment, a city level assessment can be done. If we can help you and if there's a business model, we can support you. Where there's a poor country, we have some funding, grant funding. Where there's a richer country, we can do for other models. We're very happy to work with you as an organization or as individuals. So if you're a consultant, you're interested to get involved in doing these assessments, please come to us. Amparo and myself, we can discuss how we can move it.
Thank you. Then we have over here, and then over here. If you want to have a comment, just raise your hand and I'll go down the order.
Yeah, I have a question for Meghan. Go there. Hi Meghan, can you hear me? Hello?
I can.
Okay. I work for the Saudi e-government program, and we are looking into different toolkits for open data assessments. My question is coming from the citizen, civil society perspective. If the government is hiring a particular organization to do an open data assessment, and specifically you talked about the public value framework, from which part of the world I come from, the public value understanding of the government is totally different than the civil society itself. So how would you basically recommend a government employee like myself to go and evangelize the concept of redoing the public value framework based on what the civil society is demanding? This is the same question that the person from Transparency International also partially asked as well.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer that. I think I got every fourth word, but I think I got enough to be able to answer the question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes, we hear you.
Okay. I absolutely understand. I think it's a great question. It's a question we've got many times. When the public value assessment tool was released, we were contacted by civil society organizations, namely the big ones in the United States, who said these measures of public value, such as life changes for a specific stakeholder group, is very, very important to us. It's what we're trying to convey. Is this tool something that we would use to assess what has already been done in the government? And we said, absolutely. We're releasing it to everyone. Now, when it's used inside of government, those mostly project value. They're determining the stakeholder groups. They're trying to say, how does the political value change for lobbying groups based on the fact that this specific set of data is now open? Does it give them a strategic advantage, competitive advantage? Is there a negative value, a negative economic value for a part of the industry, which did emerge quite a bit when we were working with the USDOT, that some certain groups of people would see a negative economic value based on the data being out there. But as good as what comes true in the end. And so many government managers recognize that their assumptions must be tested and their assumptions must be tested. And so we see this tool being used in both places, and a discussion, opening the discourse between them to be able to talk about the different types of value for each data set is what we're hoping will happen. The Vera Institute of Justice, which is located in New York City, does a lot of thinking and writing about the cost benefit of opening information, of ICT, and gathered a group of people together. And one of the things that they communicated to us was that what the public value tool does is it gives people common language by which they're now talking apples to apples, oranges to oranges, as we say here. And so we're hoping that it continues to do that in many between civil society and government. But we're completely understanding and it through.
It seems we're breaking up. it seems we temporarily lost connection. Maybe we move on perhaps to that.
I just want to respond to the comment.
I'm sorry, you didn't hear any of that?
Oh, okay, sorry. No, now we hear you. You broke off this one.
Okay. Oh, darn, and that was good.
Okay, do you round up, want to round up
Well, I don't know how
yeah, you don't know how much we heard.
lost, other than that this tool was meant, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we hear you.
Okay, this tool was meant for both civil society and government. And so my main points were that we're hoping that it creates common language and bridges the connection between government and civil society to talk about different areas of value, different types of public value for stakeholder groups. And it was really meant to create that common language.
Thank you. Yeah, so please continue.
Thanks. I wanted to respond to that. Is that Daniel?
Daniel.
Okay. So the Web Foundation assessment, I'm just asking the for the Open Government Partnership, the World Bank for the NGOs. The Web Foundation assessment, in fact, created a gray space for engagement, and it was financed by the World Foundation, who we worked very closely with. So we're all in contact every day. We coordinate very closely, and so when we pulled in Amparo's team to do the assessment, it's really the next phase of the assessment. So we're looking at a blueprint and roadmap and an action plan for whole of government. So Indonesia is massive. So it's 17,600 islands, 33 provinces, 497 districts. So the Web Foundation will be looking at specifically opening up action plans for the city of Jakarta. And then we will be looking at the national government action plan. So, so it's not in, we're all working very closely together because you can't be there competing for resources when it's really very scarce.
That makes my point that maybe I would like to comment on your question. Maybe if you're in a country and you want your government to get involved in these kind of policies, maybe we should all start off thinking like encouraging the government to enter a multi-stakeholder process towards the OGP instead of commissioning a research with a specific organization outside, which is great, and I've read the report with great interest, and I will read the report with great interest, and I see how they can build on each other and inform us, but actually I think that starting the process in the country and convincing the government to talk to the stakeholders, that's
So we have fine.
Yes. So I have a question for Amparo and Barbara. So how in your organizations would you promote open data as a tool in the other departments? For instance, there is a project or a tool, framework tool on policy for energy, and all UNDESA actually include open data in the framework of the tool.
That's a very tough question. We try to evangelize also within the bank because probably 5% of our staff have heard about open data, and out of that 5%, probably 1% truly understands what it is. Many people think of it as publishing data. Right? So we tried also to do the internal thing, but it must be said also that there are other departments that without our intervening at all on their own volition have advanced very much. Let me give you a couple of examples. There is one department that is internal to the bank that handles all the financials of the bank, okay, all the loans and grants that the bank makes and the repayments from the countries, etc., etc. And about a year probably ago, a year and a half ago, they've opened all the data, the true open data centers that we're talking about. So you have all the data on all the loans and all the grants and all the repayments that the bank made is open, and it was there. There is another department that helps countries more outward focusing with disaster risk management. Okay? And so reducing the vulnerability to natural disasters and coping with natural disasters once they hit. And they've also done tremendous work on open data for reducing vulnerabilities to natural disasters. And they have open data in the countries that they have been working with, and maps, and a lot of other visual and analytical tools. So it's a two-way street within the bank. Sometimes we have to go. I come from the network of the bank that has all the economists and the poverty reduction economists, and I have a lot of trouble trying to convince the part of the bank that I'm coming from, right? Because they think that it's just about, oh, this is a governance thing, this is just transparency, and this is just putting more data out in the open for open access. And the concept of, no, it's beyond that. It is for transparency, it is for good governance, but it's more than that. It is about reuse of the data fundamentally and all the good things that can happen, including better service provision, public service and private services, through the uses of the open data, right? So it's going to take some time. We use a lot of the same presentations and materials within the internal workshops, and we are starting to prepare some training also for staff on this issue.
No, I wanted from the OECD. So as you know, the OECD has been selling the data and content and knowledge produced by the organization. Up to now, it's still the main policy. But based on the request of the Secretary General, this policy is changing. So the idea is to implement an open data program for the OECD produced knowledge and content that will start therefore opening up the data and knowledge by 2015. So we're working with, we are not the people responsible for this work within the OECD. There is a group of colleagues working in the publication department on this, but we are collaborating with them. They're asking for us, for our input in understanding how the strategy to adopt and how to put it in place. So the work has started, and we are working with them as advisors, so to say, on the content of the strategy.
But cannot speed it up.
No. Because you know, the OECD, there is a part of the organization that actually lives out of it. So
we are legally reusing part of it.
Yeah, but basically what we're trying to do is what many of our governments are trying to understand how to do is how to substitute a financing model that for so many years has brought in revenues from parts of the house that produces the data and substitute it with something else, because that's the way that the organization is going to. But you know, just to let you know, it's very funny because I get critical emails from people who are non-governmental officials who are writing me, well, you talk about open government data and then we have to pay for your own data. And even if it's not me responsible, I represent the organization for this. So it unfortunately needs to be scaled up because there was the core entry, financial entry of the OECD.
I want to add to my previous because Barbara reminded me of two things. One is that one of the most important departments within the bank that got hit when my department opened the data is the publications department, because the World Development Indicators, which is published by the statistical unit of the bank, was the star product always, and it was part of a print publication, the World Development Report that comes every year, and in the annex it has all the tables. It had all the tables. And there were two things. First, obviously we lost the revenue because a lot of this data was being sold, and that has to be a top-level decision to replace that revenue from the general budget, and that happened. Okay? But then, a year later, the publications department was being hit because they also had part of the revenue and they lost. And so, instead of trying to, at the beginning they tried to stop that, right? And then it went the other way around. We convinced them that instead of us reclosing what we had already opened, they should open their, and now we have a big initiative which is the open knowledge in the bank. And so now every report, everything that it gets published, it's also in open format and free for everybody.
Thank you, Amber. So we have 3 minutes left, so two questions left. If two of you will be brief.
Yes, really fast. When we're pressuring the government to open data, we actually, in a systematically way, not only goodwill open data for the OECD portal. Pretty much, we're talking about changing some public policy, and then sometimes, and I'm thinking about like access to information laws in certain countries, but even more just basic regulation. They sometimes has to go through Congress. So when you're talking about like all these assessment guidelines and tools, how do you address talking with governments in terms of like also talking to those Congress, not only the executive branch, because sometimes the executive branch, despite the fact they invite you guys to have the assessment and all the consulting, they don't have that much power in Congress.
If we see that, I said that our readiness assessment is 3 weeks, right? The first week is desk work, and it concentrates basically on reading the laws and the strategies and policies that are relevant for open data. If we see that that is an issue, then on the second week when we have the in-field mission, we will request to talk to the leadership of the legislature. If it's not an issue, if legal is not an issue, it's not a constraint, maybe it's going to be a second order of importance. If they want us to talk to them, we will, but it's not, as important as when you really need to change an article of a law in order to enable open data. Right? So it varies by country, but yes, many times in our list of in our agenda and mentions we have legislative authority.
Really
very quick. In the UNDESA's guidelines, it recommends specifically to look into the legal framework, and if there's something in the legal framework that could hinder a comprehensive and sustainable government data initiative, then it should be addressed with the legislative branch and not trying just to put some data on there.
I think it's really important to look for champions and blockers in all branches of government, so even if there are no legal constraints, it's still important to identify potential champions and potential blockers in the legislature, in municipal government. In our work in Indonesia, we ended up identifying the mayor of Jakarta as an important champion, not executive branch, not legislative branch, but local branch. So that's really important.
Thank you. And then
I just have a short comment. After listening to all these presentations on open data toolkits, I wonder if we overestimate open data as a catalyst for social and political change. Because, I don't know how many of you have maybe taken part in the Internet Governance Forum of the UN, the whole process on how governments talk to each other. And actually, the mighty stakeholder process that we advocate probably functions in less than 5 countries on this planet. A mighty stakeholder process where you really have equal partners. So I think maybe we should, in the OECD countries, which are mostly democracies, it may work, but in the rest of the world, how difficult is it really for civil society to have an impact on open data? That's my question.
It is very difficult. it is very difficult.
It's a long way, I think.
Yeah, it's a long way, but the thing is, the perspective that we take with the readiness assessment is not to try to solve all the problems and to have but it's more the 1,000-mile journey starts with the first step. So it's just progressive and making slow progress rather than just come with a big bang that is going to solve all the problems.
And I think it holds, in general, it holds potential, but we shouldn't take for granted. We shouldn't take for granted that the impact is going to be achieved. So I think it's about working a lot on the preconditions that can help, even in different contexts, to achieve the result. In this sense, like the engaging society and changing the social dynamics. But it might be a very long-term process, but we have to avoid that open government data becomes a new government. That's my message.
I couldn't agree more. Open data is not a magic panacea. It's just an enabler for the much more important things, which is political change and citizen engagement with those processes.
I find in my work on open data that where the past 5 years were a lot about awareness raising inside government and helping them to publish stuff. Now more and more talking to individual people and individual organizations, trying to point them to where the skills are to actually start using it. And a lot of that is at a very local level, I find. So in neighborhoods, talking to people in the street, bring them together, asking them about their issues, and then point them to all the stuff that's already there. So I see a shift in the way that I'm approaching it, from top down, more middle and bottom up now than before.
So
it's a long road.
That positive sentiment so, thank you to everyone online. We lost it actually, so thanks everyone